GamingBolt presents 15 games that were graphically way ahead of their time. Video games truly have come a long way in terms of technical achievements. The industry continues to grow at an unbelievably rapid rate, and almost every year we see the release of games that are pushing the limits of what a game can look like. 20 years ago, polygonal 3D would have been next to impossible to imagine, whereas now, in today's day and age, we're way past that point. Hell, we're even closer to photorealism than we've ever been. Here in this feature, we're going to take a look at 15 games that have, throughout the history of the industry, pushed the envelope as far as visuals were concerned, and taken huge strides forward, not just for themselves, but for the gaming industry as a whole. Without further ado, let's begin. CRYSIS. Probably the most obvious choice in the entire feature. CRYSIS stunned one and all when it first launched in 2007 with just how incredibly amazing it looked. Even to this day, if you run the game on ultra-high settings, you'd be hard-pressed to find contemporary games that look better, or even as good. CRYSIS was, for the longest time, the benchmark for all games as far as visual achievements were concerned, and looking at just how beautiful it was, it's really not hard to see why. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. Naughty Dog have truly been knocking the ball out of the park with almost every single one of their releases over the last decade or so, making one game after another that raises the bar for just how good a game can look on consoles. Uncharted 2 was, without a doubt, one of their biggest achievements. Back when it first launched in 2009, it was stunning to behold, with brilliant animations, an unbelievable level of detail, shine, and polish that, for its time, was as close to photorealism as one could imagine. God of War 2005. Every single God of War we've ever played has pushed whatever hardware it was on to its absolute limits, and the very first game, which launched on the PlayStation 2 back in 2005, was no different. God of War was a gorgeous game, and for 2005, the level of detail and polish that its visuals boasted was unprecedented. From the way the blood splattered everywhere with each swing of Kratos' blades, to the way his muscles moved and flexed with every one of his breaths, to the gorgeous and crisply detailed environments throughout the entire game, God of War was truly a technical marvel. Donkey Kong Country. We take 3D polygons for granted in today's day and age, but there was a time when even the possibility of having 3D visuals in a game seemed impossible. It was only with the onset of the N64 and the PlayStation era that polygonal 3D became a bit of a staple in our industry, which is exactly why Donkey Kong Country's visuals were so unbelievably groundbreaking, because the game did it on an SNES in 1994. Employing rendered 3D sprites and a lush, beautiful art style, Rare's masterpiece, Donkey Kong Country, stunned everyone who laid their eyes on the game with just how ahead of its time it was. Killzone 2. Killzone 2's infamous CGI E3 reveal trailer has become a thing of legend by this point. But while we all give Sony slack for what they tried to pull, the one thing no one will ever deny is that the actual game launched in 2009 and it really didn't look all that different from what Sony had initially promised. Killzone 2 was a stunning technical achievement, showcasing a sharpness and crispness in its visuals that many didn't believe possible in console games. From its lighting and particle effects, to the tiny little details in things such as the models of the weapons or even the textures in the ground. Killzone 2 was a beautiful game to behold in every way possible. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader. Looking at Rogue Squadron 2 now, many, if not all people, would just dismiss it as yet another one of those awkward, bumbling attempts at achieving photorealism in the early parts of the 21st century, until you realize that this game was a 2001 game. For 2001, Rogue Squadron's visuals weren't just really damn good, they were downright spectacular. The outer space of the Star Wars universe was displayed in glorious detail, showcasing detailed models of everything from TIE fighters and Star Destroyers to X-Wings and the Death Star. An incredible achievement without a shadow of a doubt. SOULCALIBUR. Sega were absolute masters of their art when they were at their peak, and there's no doubt in anyone's mind that in the early days of the Dreamcast, with masterpieces such as SOULCALIBUR, that is exactly where they were. But not only was SOULCALIBUR an incredible game in almost every way possible, it was also a visual beast. In an era where games were still struggling to wrap their heads around the concept of 3D polygons, as is evidenced by the awkward, pointy visuals, SOULCALIBUR looked unbelievably good, with an excellent character model and a great level of detail in all of its environments. Sega Super GT. Sega Super GT, also known as Scud Racing, is one of those 1990s arcade masterpieces, and it truly is a shame that it never launched on any console, because it was an amazing game. Visually though, it was truly outstanding. This is a game that was released in 1996, but looking at those visuals you wouldn't believe that for 1 second. This is evidenced even further when you look at racing games that came out even 3 or 4 years after Sega Super GT. They still didn't look nearly as good, for the most part. Truly ahead of its time. Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Hideo Kojima has always been an absolute genius in almost every single thing he tries to do, and pushing the boundaries of technical achievements is just one of the things that his games are usually associated with. Metal Gear Solid 2 was a game that launched in late 2001, but it was leaps and bounds ahead of almost all games of that era. The animations were lifelike for its time, while the game was also crammed full of minute details. For instance, the top of the Big Shell facility, slick with moisture under the torrential rainfall, was incredible to behold. The Order 1886. The Order 1886 carried the burden of immense expectations, being among the first ever notable releases for the PS4. And while it's safe to say that the game turned out to be a massive disappointment in the face of those expectations, it is nonetheless remains to this day an unbelievable technical achievement. The Order 1886 showed everyone the true power of next gen when it launched in 2015, and to this day, 3 years on, it still stands tall among the best looking games of this current console generation. SHENMUE. Once again, the amazing work of Sega and their visual masterpieces is on display here. SHENMUE was a game that first launched in 1999, and it was so ridiculously ahead of the curve. In a time where games were struggling to implement 3D graphics properly, SHENMUE did it incredibly well, and on a system that was, when all was said and done, considerably weaker even than the PS2, which wasn't all that strong to begin with. Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots. Metal Gear Solid 4 got so many things right, and a few things wrong, but the one thing that is universally considered to be among its biggest strengths is its technical achievements. The game was a visual masterpiece, showcasing every single one of its environments with immaculate detail, every single one of its characters with unprecedented sharpness. Remember how Snake's bandana swayed in the wind? This was supposed to be one of the last Metal Gear games Kojima would ever make. Of course, it really wasn't, and he truly poured his heart and soul into every aspect of this game. The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt. Pre-release promotion of The Witcher 3 was stunning to behold, and while the game itself was an absolute masterpiece, one of the only ways it disappointed people was how significant of a visual downgrade it received. The fact that, in spite of those downgrades, The Witcher 3 deserves a place on this list should tell you just how incredible the game actually looks. From the way the trees sway in violent winds, to the way the ground gets muddied and wet after a storm, to the way the screen glares with sunlight, to even the glorious detail in Geralt's beard and hair, The Witcher 3 was a game that was brimming with ridiculous detail. Black. Truly an underappreciated gem. Black was one of the most intense, action-packed shooters of its time, and while the criticism that it was too lacking in content was completely fair, it definitely deserved more recognition than it got. But it wasn't just an intense shooter, it was also a brilliant technical achievement. The action not only felt intense, it also looked intense, with amazing effects, powered by incredible lighting and animations all across the board, not to mention incredibly detailed environments and models. Drive Club. Drive Club makes use of tech that is ahead of its time even today, 4 years on from its release, phenomenally using PBR coupled with dynamic lighting and GI. Its weather effects are absolutely incredible too. Drive Club has its fair share of issues, sure, that is something even the most ardent fans of the game wouldn't deny, but something else no one can ever deny is the fact that the game is gorgeous. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.